Imagine for a second a company so powerful, so completely woven into the fabric of a nation that it seemed, well, immortal. A 200-year-old titan building everything from top-secret military bases to the very hospitals that save our lives. This company wasn't just big, it was essential. And then, in what felt like the blink of an eye, it was just gone, leaving behind a 7 billion pound crater. This is the story of Carillion, and its collapse wasn't just a business failure, it was a national thriller.
And this is the central mystery we're going to unpack. How does a company with over £5 billion in annual revenue just run out of money? I mean, on paper, this was a roaring success, but in reality, it was a house of cards. How could a business with all that cash pouring in suddenly have just £29 million left in the bank? That's the question that baffled the government, vaporized a corporate giant, and wrecked thousands of lives.
Okay, so to really understand the fall, you first have to appreciate the sheer height from which this giant fell. We're talking about Carillion, a name that for decades was basically synonymous with British industry, with power. It had this incredible legacy stretching all the way back, giving it a pedigree of over a century of literally building Britain. And its scope, I mean, it was just staggering. They were everywhere, kind of woven into the background of daily life. They were maintaining 50,000 homes for military families, serving 18,000 meals a day in hospitals, and they were a key player on that massive HS2 high-speed rail line. The country, in so many ways, really couldn't run without them.
And the numbers seem to back it all up. In 2016, the company posted revenues of over £5 billion. Let that sink in. This wasn't some little struggling firm on the ropes. This was a blue-chip behemoth, a cornerstone of the London Stock Exchange. And it wasn't just about projects, it was about people. 43,000 people all over the world relied on Carillion for their jobs, with nearly 20,000 of them right there in the UK. That's not just a company, that's the size of a small city.
So how'd they get so big? Well, they didn't get there by chance. Carillion went on an epic shopping spree. After it was formed in 1999, it just started devouring its rivals. Molam, Alfred McAlpine, EGA, one after the other. Each acquisition made it bigger, more powerful, and, crucially, loaded it up with more and more debt that was just quietly piling up behind the scenes.
But here's where the story takes a turn. Because behind all those soaring revenues and that sprawling empire, a really dangerous game was being played. The company's impressive financial health was, for the most part, an illusion. A masterpiece of financial engineering designed to look solid on paper, even as the real foundations were basically turning to sand.
The secret to this magic trick? It's something called aggressive accounting. The simplest way to think about it is counting your chickens long before they've hatched. Carillion was booking these massive profits from huge multi-year construction projects, years before the cash would ever actually land in their bank account. It painted this incredibly rosy picture that just didn't match the reality of their cash flow.
And this chart right here just illustrates the problem perfectly. Just look at that growing gap between the profits Carillion claimed it was making and the actual cash it was generating. Over 5 years, they paid out hundreds of millions more to their shareholders in dividends than they actually made in cash. I mean, you don't have to be a math genius to know that just doesn't work.
So how did they hide this massive cash shortfall? With a very clever and pretty deceptive little scheme. First, they'd tell their small suppliers, hey, you're going to have to wait up to 120 days to get paid. Then they'd offer a solution. Their banks would pay the suppliers early. Now, this made Carillion look super cash rich, but in reality, all they were doing was turning their supplier bills into billions in hidden, short-term debt to the banks.
But you know, a magic trick like that can only last for so long. Eventually, the real world catches up with you. And for Carillion, the real world came in the form of these massive, complex projects that started to go disastrously and very publicly wrong.
And these were the big ones. 2 state-of-the-art hospitals, a major new road in Scotland, a huge development project in Qatar. See, Carillion had bid aggressively low to win the work, and when the costs spiraled and disputes broke out, these contracts just turned into financial black holes, sucking cash out of the company at an absolutely alarming rate. This was the source of that infamous £845 million write-down.
By late 2017, the situation was catastrophic. The company was drowning in nearly £1 billion of debt. It owed another £500 million to its own pension schemes. And when the music finally stopped, it had just £29 million in cash left. That's not enough to survive the week.
And so the death spiral began. What had been this slow-motion car crash happening for years suddenly became a high-speed pileup, and it all unfolded in just 6 chaotic months.
Just look at the speed of this collapse. July 10th, wham! First profit warning hits, the CEO is out. 2 months later, bam! Another warning. Now the losses are over £1 billion. 6 weeks after that, a third warning. They admit they're about to break the rules of their bank loans. The game was up.
The market's reaction was, as you can imagine, brutal and immediate. All those investors who had believed in the magic trick suddenly saw the cold, hard reality. The company's value was just wiped out, almost overnight. There was no coming back from this.
After a frantic weekend of failed rescue talks with the government and the banks, the inevitable happened. The invisible empire that had built Britain for decades simply ceased to exist.
This was the final, devastating blow. This wasn't administration, where a company can sometimes be saved. No, this was compulsory liquidation. That is the most drastic, final procedure there is. It means it's over, and this became the UK's largest ever trading liquidation.
And the scale of the wreckage they left behind was just staggering. The company's total liabilities, that's what it owed to everyone, from banks to suppliers to its own pensioners, was later estimated to be almost £7 billion.
But this wasn't just a financial story. The human cost was immense. Over 3,000 employees lost their jobs. 30,000 small businesses, the backbone of the construction industry, were left with £2 billion in unpaid bills. Many of them went bankrupt themselves. And 27,000 pensioners were left terrified, wondering if the retirement they'd worked for their entire lives had just vanished.
In the aftermath, the question on everyone's lips was, who was to blame? A parliamentary inquiry was launched, and let me tell you, they did not pull their punches.
The inquiry's report was brutal, and it named names. The finance director, Richard Adam, he was labeled the architect of the company's aggressive accounting. The CEO, Richard Howson, they said he led a business that careered progressively out of control. And the chairman, Philip Green, was dismissed as a cheerleader-in-chief for his blind, unquestioning optimism.
This single quote from that final report just perfectly captures the whole saga. It wasn't one single mistake, it was a culture of taking huge risks, of ignoring all the warning signs, and of prioritizing short-term cash and executive bonuses over the long-term health of the company. A relentless dash for cash.
And that leaves us with this deeply unsettling question. Carillion was seen as too big to fail, and yet it did. The government refused a bailout. So when all the dust settled, who was the real safety net? It wasn't the banks, it wasn't the state. It was the thousands of employees who lost their jobs, the small business owners who lost their companies, and ultimately the taxpayers who had to pick up the bill. And that is something worth thinking about.